Well, hello there, friend. Welcome back to the Construction Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Bradley Hartmann. I'm excited to bring to you today my conversation, one that's somewhat unique in that these two individuals worked at the same organization, Trex, for over 15 years and now collaborate as manufacturer and distributor. You'll meet Mr. Chris Gerhard, who spent 15 years at Trex and is now at SBP, Specialty Building Products. And you'll also meet Mr. Bret Martz, who graduated from the University of Tennessee, national champions in baseball, and has worked at Trex ever since. He's their national sales leader. In this conversation, we talk about leadership, we talk about innovation, we talk about some of their favorite mistakes and the kindest thing someone has ever done for both of them. You, my friend, are in for a treat. You will enjoy this conversation. It was a lot of fun. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Mr. Chris Gerhard of Specialty Building Products and Mr. Bret Martz of Trex. Mr. Chris Gerhard, Bret Martz, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks.
We're going to start out in a little unconventional way. I'm going to say one name. Neither of you know who is coming. Brad, it's probably going to be more for you, but Chris, I mean, if you're feeling
Frisky.
Thank you, Frisky. Jump right in. The name, Roger Wittenberg. Who is he and why does he matter?
Oh, you did your research.
I mean,
Yeah,
we're
look at
professionals
it.
here.
So Roger Wittenberg was, technically the founder of Trex in the sense that an inventor years and years ago, probably 30 plus years ago now, came up with the original concept of Trex. There's a million stories that float around within the halls of Trex, but the one that I've always heard is, he was affiliated with some farmers. They were taking day or week old bread and using that to feed chickens, right? And because of that, he saw a pile of plastic that was starting to build up. And being who he was, an inventor, he thought, well, I can combine the wood that's around on the farm with plastic and make fire logs. One thing that you find about Trex is it doesn't burn very well, but it also doesn't rot, right? And so the way that Trex came to be is Roger invented this, realized it wasn't probably the best for a fire log. Eventually, ExxonMobil was looking for a way to use waste streams and bought the technology, and it kind of took off from there and eventually became Trex. So that's what Roger Wittenberg means to me. Yeah. That's what you probably heard the same story, right?
It is, yeah. And turn that to and it started as a really commercial industrial grade product. Now Roger, to see it today, I think you can imagine what his reaction would be to see what it's turned into, which is a true consumer product, and it's great.
Yeah.
Well, the line that I wrote down was 20 tractor loads of unwanted bread per day. So he was processing this, making breadcrumbs, and then just had this pile of plastic bags that was holding the loaves of bread. And they said, I started looking at logs and then park benches, and then said, how many park benches are there in the United States? And then ultimately, so I knew none of this and was just fascinated. I do have a question. Maybe it's a request. I'm always looking for free gear. Is there any Rivenite or TimberX branding, maybe some trucker hats from 25 years ago? Any of those still around?
Let me think. We just moved into a new corporate office, but if I can dig some up, I'll make sure you get it. Don't forget, we had bumpers for parking lots too. That was the big one, right?
Oh.
Yeah, so if you think about the curbs that you have in a parking lot,
yes,
they used originally, that was what the Rivenite or TimberX was used for as well.
That makes sense.
It's pretty cool.
There used to be some old marketing collateral on both those brands, but I never saw the product, never saw samples.
Yeah.
I saw the old school samples, but nothing that would be commercialized.
I'm sure we've got something laying around. I'll find it for you.
Somebody who said TimberX to Trex decking, there had to be a promotion in there. Somebody right there needed an attaboy.
Yeah, if you think about where Trex came from, I mean, there were basically four gentlemen from ExxonMobil that bought TimberX at the time from ExxonMobil and took it private at the time and then eventually public. And one of those gentlemen was Andy Ferrari. He's still around.
Okay.
Marketing genius. I mean, guru from way back in the day. I think rumors are he's the hefty guy.
That's the
if you think about that branding.
It's a good little rumor.
And I think
got legs.
and somehow he figured out a way to build out the Trex name, and that's kind of where it started from. But pretty cool history.
Yeah, well, just looking at knowing you've been there for 2 decades, Roger sells it for $10 million to Mobil. Then him and 3 other guys buy it back 3 or 4 years later for 30. And then they go, and obviously you guys had, over $1 billion in sales last year. I didn't know any of this. Obviously, I grew up in a lumber yard since I was 15, and Trex has been around since then. But not knowing any of this history, I thought was really kind of fun place to start.
That's a great story.
Yeah. You guys have roughly, at least according to the annual report, roughly 50% market share. And I think we'll start with Bret, and then I think, Chris, I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on the other side of the coin. Is Trex now, in some cases, could be argued, it's almost like Kleenex. You guys invented the category. It's been around for so long. You have some competitors that might start with the letter A and maybe start with the letter F. But I think you have consumers or contractors that are saying, oh, it's like Trex, right? I'm just curious from the sales standpoint and the branding as you think about your focus on growing market share. My guess would be, obviously, you got 3 giant customers that have a ton of volume with you, how to grow beyond that with independent lumber yards and such. How do you think about that of just knowing you guys have been so successful, you are now in Kleenex territory, or do you guys not really think about that at all?
We think about it. I mean, first of all, you wouldn't trade the brand awareness for anything, right? I mean, so you'll take the folks who have you out for a barbecue and they're like, look at my great Trex deck. And I'm like, that's not Trex. And they're like, oh, I swear it's Trex. I'm like, I've been there 20 years. We've never made that product, right?
Yeah.
But you don't trade the brand awareness, and it's a huge asset. I think when I talk to Leslie, our VP of marketing, Leslie Atkins, the thing that we really focus on is how do we continue to differentiate? And it's product innovation. Obviously, we spend a tremendous amount of money continuing to invest in the brand and drive brand awareness and category awareness, but it's also the tools, assets, and resources we provide to our team, right? We want to go in and differentiate ourselves, not only because we're Trex in the product, but also what we offer our customers, right? So how do we help you capitalize on trends like digital marketing? How do we help you with e-commerce? How do we provide a different selling experience to you and provide tools and resources that candidly the other folks don't? And so really it's about differentiation. We'll continue to build the brand and drive brand awareness, but it's how you differentiate yourself, how you're that different when you walk through the door, right?
Now, Chris, as I think about SBP, Specialty Building Products, strategy of acquisition, how much do you think about, hey, as US Lumber or DW Distribution, how much do you think about your own branding of SBP, and do you want that now? And how do you think about that in terms of growing your own business?
It's a great question, and that's new for us, right? So SBP would not be widely known to everybody, but our operating brands would be, right? So the platform company, US Lumber, if you think of the growth of the business over time, half of it's been organic, but half through acquisition, and that started with names that people would know: Boston Cedar, Midwest Lumber, Midstate, Nilco, Alexandria Molding, Reeb, Amerhart, MSI in Florida, DW where we sit here today. Those brands have strength, and there's ownership of those brands locally, and there's a connection with customers. So don't want to disrupt that. But as we progress and go forward, the name SBP will carry weight in a consolidating market. Customers want to know the strength that you offer, the brand selection you have, the service proposition the value you deliver to the market. That needs to be under one umbrella. So we see it moving that way over time, but at the same time, we don't want to disrupt the power of the local brand.
As you go throughout the country, you talked about meeting up with Bret last week or earlier this week. How do you think about connecting, building trust, helping independent dealers, or the Kodiaks and the USLBMs, et cetera, BFS, all those folks? How do you help them grow their business when there's such a wide spectrum of sophistication? I grew up in a lumberyard, Siegel's Home and Building Centers in Elgin, Illinois. That's what I knew. And then got out of college and started working on their sides. And I was like, oh, not everybody thinks about merchandising and branding and organization and revenue per square foot like they did. How do you think about collaborating with manufacturers, going up and down the chain to really help them grow their own businesses when we're at a time looking at commodity prices where they certainly are? And yet, my guess is you two gentlemen, it's not a good strategy to go in and say, you guys have no idea what you're doing here. Let me show you how it's done. We're smart. How do you guys think about that together?
Well, it's a complicated supply chain. So if you think of the manufacturer, the distributor, the retailer, the contractor, the builder, and then the consumer,
right?
How do you keep everybody on message to understand the value proposition that we both deliver together? That's the challenge. And so the value that we offer to our customer, the retailer, is the bundle of benefits we have and the products we choose to be in. So we're not in the commodity space. We're going to be in specialty products that require value-added sales efforts on our part, that are SKU intensive, that require salesmanship. And so we do that in conjunction with the supplier, where they're going to do such a good job. And Trex is a great example of building an unbreakable bond with both the contractor and the consumer. It is morphed into a consumer brand, right? So their work and their efforts downstream to convert contractors, to identify new contractors, and then build that bond to the consumer. So they're going looking for a product, and they come to the buying decision knowing really what they want. Our role in this is the service proposition that we deliver to the retailer. So the hope that we meet in the middle. We're doing such a good job with the breadth of our offering to the retailer. Trex or any other manufacturer who's got a branded space in those efforts is pulling through that business, and it kind of meets in the middle. So if we're doing a good job of servicing and providing product knowledge and sales training and the like at the dealer level, if that business is being brought in by Trex, that's a pretty unbreakable bond. And when you think about earlier in the conversation, thinking of that brand awareness and the Kleenex effect, when the sales pitch starts, we're like Trex, but you've got them in that give them what they want. And if we're doing our job on our side, we're providing inventory solutions and product knowledge, and that's being met with the demand that's being generated downstream, and that's the marriage.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's unique too. I mean, we've been very fortunate to have a core group of distributors that we've kind of built this business together, and SBP's been, a huge part of Trex's success over the last 20 plus years, right? And with that comes a fair amount of collaboration and transparency, and I think that's a big deal, especially as our industry has evolved coming out of COVID and the technology platforms and some of the things that we look at. We talked about a meeting Tuesday where we talked about what those platforms look like in the future and how we collectively help bring, what's challenging our dealers, how we bring that kind of home to them and help them get through that, right? Because ultimately where we're at as a consumer product is we want to have our product available where the consumer chooses to shop. Right? And we're not going to be able to dictate in the future where the consumer chooses to shop. If they want to go through e-commerce because that's what they've grown up and that's what they're accustomed to, we're going to have to figure out how to do that and how to do that within the auspices of the current supply chain. And we've had great conversations about what that looks like. We don't have it figured out, trust me, but we're having those conversations, we're collaborating, we're trying to solve for those issues. I think when you can get to that point, you're well ahead of everyone else in that aspect.
And that's key because we don't need to duplicate efforts, right? The business is complicated enough. If we communicate well enough, we know what the other one's doing, and we can support that in the right way to get the desired result. So that lack of duplication of efforts is really the magic that allows us to work together and plan for the future, understand what we need, what's our value proposition, and how it's going to change. And that could be as simple as, all right, what's our e-commerce strategy, right? How are we going to approach the future of the business together? But that comes just with constant communication and the frequency of that to make sure that we're working on the same things together and that we have the right expectations of each other.
Right. What have you found to be successful as you think kind of all the way down to the contractor with the homeowner in terms of thinking differently? We hear a lot about, well, this is the way we've always done it. And we're all here, we spend most of our time with dealers, and the dealers will say, well, dude, these contractors, they can't get out of their own way when it comes to marketing and using social media. Well, then you talk to a distributor who's dealing with the dealers, and they're like, these guys, we're still talking about whether or not they should have a website. You guys are trying to give them e-commerce, and they're like, I'm not sure if we're ready for that. I'm not sure if my customer wants it. And then you move all the way up. What have you found successful when, obviously, both of you and the organizations you're with are successful with innovation? Part of what is going to make you successful is encouraging other people to adopt that faster. Take this either way you want. This is what has worked, or I'll tell you what is on our not to-do list, because we know this doesn't work.
I'll go first.
Yeah. So I've got an opinion, and so some of that is the voice of the customer matters, right? They don't want to be sold or pushed in a direction that doesn't feel right for their business. But if the path to future growth, future margin expansion, if that is the recipe, then there's a lesson to be taught there. And consolidation in the market gets you to the point where not everyone's going to do it the same way.
Yeah.
And so, so we've got to figure out what fits for that retailer, that customer, to understand the sales benefit to alignment. And some of that's trying to, in many cases, disrupt a guaranteed sale, which is difficult. So take Trex, for instance. A lot of wood conversion. That's the story. That's the growth engine for all of us going forward. And in many cases, no one's going to a showroom to buy pressure-treated lumber, right? They're calling and say, I need X delivered Tuesday.
Correct.
Well, to understand the financial benefit and giving a desired product to that end user, to step in and disrupt that and say, I can do that, but have you thought of this? And trying to weave that in the conversation just from an educational standpoint and give options. The options allow them to choose. And in many cases, they're going to do what's in their financial best interest. But it's understanding the voice of the customer to make sure that you're delivering the value and the services that they require.
Yeah. And I'll go further downstream. We've put together a team in the field that's focused on the contractor. We've got a Trex Pro program that we utilize, and that provides leads and all kinds of access to different Trex materials and different Trex products and branding opportunities and things like that. But at the core of that is education, right? We want that contractor to be able to sit there in front of the consumer and tell them why Trex is better and why they should use Trex. Now, behind the scenes, we're helping them with digital platforms to help make them better marketers. We have a huge national spend. They can leverage that on a local scale. We try to provide tools, like I said, again, that differentiate assets, resources to make their businesses more efficient and more effective. It's interesting because once we get to the consumers, it falls into our marketing department, and it's really what we do day in and day out, which is heavy focus on Trex and the Trex brand and brand awareness and category awareness too. So it's a bifurcated approach for us. SPP does a phenomenal job with the dealers. We're certainly involved. But we're trying to get downstream from that a little bit and get in front of those contractors and make sure that they understand the features and benefits of Trex. And when that consumer asks, they can pass it along.
What have you found works well as we're sitting here in 2024 in terms of this is education, this is training where you guys leave and you're like, all right, I think they got it. And then months down the road, you see the revenue from that and you're like, all right, we know that worked. What's working best for you guys?
So twofold from our position, and I will weave in some of what we're doing with Trex there, is that some of that's online, some of that's in person, and some of that's in the field, right? And some of that's based on the customer you're trying to reach. But Reed Millwork for us on the door side has a wonderful online training toolbox that allows everyone to be really well in touch with the iterations of products and leaves them with confidence on what to sell. You couple that with, say, a mill tour, and Trex has what they call Trex University, which is hands-on install training, a view of the plant, but it also gives a chance to show the trajectory of the category and where the relevance is for Trex and us and why they should be aligned. So the constant communication, some of that's hands-on, some of it's online, and allowing people to get the information as they want it is an important component of that too.
Second, what Chris said, as far as the in-person, I think works the best for product knowledge. I mean, you got to touch it, feel it, see what we're talking about, install it. So for our people, we tend to do a couple in-person trainings a year. We try to get them together whenever they have regional meetings or national sales meetings. One step further to the consumer, we've put together a pretty thorough YouTube video collection of how-tos. Okay. So how to install Trex, and they're short. Some of them are short 5-minute videos about blind fastening or hidden fasteners or how to install a rail. That seemed to pick up a lot of momentum the last couple of years because somebody, maybe they can't find a contractor or they want to do it themselves, but it's a little intimidating. And to be able to go online and just look at a video and understand how to do something, we think that's really paid dividends for us as far as getting further down to the consumer.
Absolutely.
Case in point, we're here at DW today, and we had 2 groups come through, right? And a chance to see our facility, see the products we sell, and in many cases, I didn't know you sold that, right? So that one-on-one focus with customers to be able to see what the total value proposition is valuable to do in person also.
Yeah. So Bret, you graduated from University of Tennessee, started working at Trex. That's the end of the current story here. You've been there the entire time. Your story, we're hearing more and more like, this doesn't happen. Guys don't graduate and whatever. Early 2000s, stay with one company. They got to bounce around. When it comes to attracting and retaining top talent, what have you seen Trex do so well that made you want to stay? And how are you doing that with the folks who are coming out of school now to do the same thing?
We've been fortunate, Trex. We've had a lot of tenure there, and we still have a lot of tenure on our staff. And we've been able to bring some new folks into the fold as well, which has been great, right? Give us a different perspective. But as far as attracting talent, I think one of the things that we do that's pretty unique is we bring a group of people right out of college or 1 or 2 years experience into the group, and they start calling on our retailers. And that's been a great conduit for us the last couple of years to get them trained on the basics of selling and understand the products. And then a lot of them have moved into the pro side of the business and started calling on dealers and contractors and things like that. So that's been great as far as attracting talent, right? Having that the ability to bring somebody right out of college into your organization and kind of acclimate them to the culture and get them exposed to Trex has been huge. As far as retaining talent, one of the reasons that I love Trex that have always been here, and some of my directors tell me today, is you always felt like you could make a difference. You always felt like you were empowered. You know, when Chris and I worked together, Chris would very rarely say, "This is what you should do." He said, "What do you want to do?" Right? And that was a big deal because you always felt like you were in control of your business. So while it was a big organization, it was very entrepreneurial in that sense, right? And you always felt like you had support and good leadership to kind of help you develop. And I think for a lot of people, you'd love to think that everybody's going to get promoted. But we spend a lot of time giving our people training, you know, on financial acumen and how to run businesses and things like that, because you want them to feel like they're bettering themselves, building a resume. I mean, you hope they're building a resume to progress through Trex, but they're always in control of their future, and they're moving forward and becoming better at their profession.
Chris, does any story, your collaboration with Bret, when you guys were working together, stand out in your mind, just in terms of either your incredible mentorship of Bret, or how as a mentee or someone younger learning the business, or maybe not learning the business? I know, because Bret, you were there when Chris joined, correct?
Yeah.
Were you involved whether or not to hire this gentleman?
No, that was not me.
Well, let's back up for a second.
Okay.
So Bret was part of an interview panel when I first joined the company. So we
That's
did
fair.
spend some time, and Bret was in a different role at the time, and so maybe there's a stamp of approval. I don't know, but
Did you fire any zingers? Do you remember?
I don't. That was a long time ago. I just remember Chris was coming from the food industry, and I was trying to figure out how that made any sense. But obviously, it did. It made a ton of
Talking about
sense. So.
20 tractor loads of unwanted bread.
I know,
This is
right?
dope.
it all weaves together.
That also tells you how inefficient the bread industry is, right? I mean, if you got
You-
that
you
much
are not
bread,
wrong.
right?
Yes, there was more opportunities there. What stands out in your mind just from your time together when you guys worked together?
Yeah, there are a few things. So I'm incredibly proud of the work that Bret's done, especially in this new role. So he had a rare balance of financial background and acumen, and coupled with a sales approach, which is kind of not the norm, right? You're either focused in one lane or the other. But I think most memorably, you know, back when Trex was at its worst, and probably in the mid 2000s, maybe 07, 08, quality problems, competitive entries were coming in the market that raised the bar and the expectation of the category, and we had a fractured distribution base. And so, you know, Bret at the time was in a market that needed some change, and through that, we stayed true, and Bret more than most stayed true to the principles of the business and said, okay, if the behavior is not going to be at a level that we'd expect, if we can't believe in ourselves, then we can't. Then it's a house of cards. So having conviction in the path of the business in the midst of distribution changes, which at the time was probably the most critical juncture of the company, with competitors coming in, and seeing the long game at that stage of his career was, you know, obviously insightful into how he's grown into the role he has today.
Tell me a little bit, Bret, about coming out of, or kind of during this period going into COVID. I think the whole industry, you know, we thought, you know, Great Recession 2.0 was coming back around in the first quarter of 2020. And then we had to take both our feet off the brake and then jam them both on the gas at the same time. And it's been like that for a while. Now all of a sudden things are kind of settling. What have you learned just about oscillating your own leadership style and your communication about your sales team that, I guess, is from a high level, the mission doesn't change, which is to continue to dominate. What has that been like for you?
Yeah, and Chris was with, you know, Chris and I were working together at the time at Trex when COVID kind of kicked off. And, you know, that I don't think anything will replace those first 2 months as far as what do we do? What's going to happen? You know, where's this going to end up? And then, you know, you quickly pivot into a situation where you're sold out and you're on allocation, right? And that was pretty much industry wide. And so whether you were at a manufacturer or a distributor, you were basically telling your customers what they could buy from you, which hopefully never happens in our lifetime again. That wasn't the most fun, but it created some dynamic challenges around pricing. You know, we had this rampant escalation of inflationary pressure across all kinds of raw materials and inputs. And then you come out of COVID and your organization says they're energized and they're charged, but those muscles haven't been flexed in a while, right? And so now they're trying to figure out, like, where do I go? How do I do it? The environment's a little different. Your customers aren't necessarily as accommodating as they were before. If you're coming through the door, they want you to bring value. They don't want you just to be there to say hello. Yeah. And so you had to kind of rethink about how you went to market and really focus on getting your people's mindset back into let's go sell again. Yeah. And be assertive. And I think all along the way, you had to remember to be consistent. You couldn't pivot every 3 months and kind of change what you were telling, right? I think any good leader, especially on the sales side of the business, is you set a couple key targets or a couple key metrics and you stick to it, right? And you have to be resolute. I mean, you can't do it till you run it into the ground, but you can't continually pivot because you'll never get anything accomplished, right? And so it was different. I mean, there was a lot of resilience that had to be involved there as you try to get folks out. And some people weren't comfortable being in the field for a while, but you come out on the other side and you're proud of what you and your team got accomplished, and you think you're better off for it, right?
Well, it's interesting. I haven't thought much about that, but the word pivot in general carries a positive connotation. However, sports nerds, you pivot multiple times at the basketball, you've just done a 360, right? So I hadn't thought about it, but you're right. If you were coming in and we're constantly pivoting, we're like, let's switch this. On the other end of that message, someone's like, dude, what's your deal? Just help me, right? Do what I'm trying to do here. That line Bret referred to earlier of what do you want to do instead of, I probably default to this, was just like, step aside. Here's what you need to do. Just do this, this, and this. It's not that hard. Not a great leadership style. Giving them, hoping they think along these lines. Is there anything as you think about your leadership journey, Chris, any lines or phrases that you use with people to give them some authority, give them some autonomy, give them some room to make a decision and even potentially fail that come to mind that might be instructive?
So I struggle with that early on. I mean, the instinct is to take control, and you see a situation, you run at it, and you do that a couple times, and you realize the demotivation that takes place in any relationships you would have. But it's not. I've been fortunate to have mentors and influencers in my life that have kind of shaped my belief in how to work with people. Right. So the framework of approaching that we work together, brings in a conversation of how do we do this together? Let's talk about options. And so if you're going to bring a problem to the surface, a proposed solution has to accompany that, right? We'll work on that together, but don't come to just for answers. And we're going to do this together, and you need to have a voice in that. That's empowering, right? And that builds a sense of community and trust that we can work on this together. And you want to you get to a point in your career where you want to surround yourself with so much talent that you make yourself superfluous.
Yes. I'm not doing great. But yes, this whole idea of like, how do we get a self-managing business? You got a few things that are kind of self-managing. You're like, look at this thing just runs. Yeah. And other ones, I'm like, I'm a total failure. But enough about me. Bret, let's talk about you. I call this my Sheryl Crow question. Do you have a favorite mistake where maybe at the moment in time, it hurt like hell, and maybe it was public, maybe it was private, but it was undoubtedly a mistake, but looking back on it, you value that because you've learned so much from it?
Yeah, I don't know if there's one that sticks out. I mean, I think if I go back to how I was as a young manager versus as I grew and evolved, I mean, I could go into some dealer stories that wouldn't be appropriate for this, just with the conversations that were had, but I'll still contend they weren't mistakes, but whatever. No, it's all good.
You'll double down?
No, I'll double down on those. But, I think about, and Chris kind of hit on it a second ago, when you're a young manager, that pace setting, I think inherently all good salespeople are pace setters.
And what do you mean by that?
And what I mean by that is, you've got a problem, you've got a challenge. One of your employees is trying to address that problem, and you say, you know what, forget it, don't worry about it. I'll just go do it because I can do it, right? And I think you find a lot of young managers, it's not one mistake, but it's a multitude of mistakes because they never develop their people because they're always doing it for them, right? They're pace setting. And I've watched that as with a lot of our management team and talk to them about, do you realize that you don't do it? Because then you find yourself getting frustrated with your employees because they don't learn and they never get better at that particular, whatever that challenge has been, they consistently come to you, but you demotivate them, right? Yeah. You don't let them learn, you don't let them make mistakes and grow as a professional. So that was probably my biggest learning early on. I don't know if it was one particular mistake, but it was trust your people and let them learn along the way and make sure that you support them as you do that, right? That's probably been the biggest for me.
Well, especially for sales managers. I think that's one of the hardest things. A lot of times sales managers get in that role because they were successful in selling.
Correct.
And it takes so much restraint to just, I know you think you know the answer. You probably know the guy on the other end. You got to let him do it. It's one of the hardest things.
It was, I had the conversation a couple of weeks ago. So-and-so just, they don't get it. They don't know how to do this pitch, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, I've sat through 3 of the pitches and you've done all 3. So how are they supposed to learn if you're not letting them do it, right? Yeah. And so it's the same thing. You got to trust and just, it's something I think you learn as you mature and build up over time.
Yeah. You got a favorite mistake, Chris?
Well, there are a bunch to choose from, no doubt. But I think one that comes to mind would be early in my career as a salesperson in a different industry, had put together what I thought was at the time a seismic deal and celebrated too soon. And it fell apart at the end. And so that was a coachable moment for me, in that sometimes handshake deals don't always mean we're done. And let's follow through to the end before we celebrate. And so that's always been in the back of my head. That's the finality of some deals. It comes at different stages of those conversations. But I think being surprised that it didn't, the end game wasn't what I thought on the timeline I thought, was awakening to me as a young seller to see that there's a process here, and we got to follow that.
I'm not going to ask you about the deal.
Yeah.
I will ask you about the celebration.
Yeah.
What did you buy the Benz? What did you do?
Hopefully it was epic.
No, not so much a personal celebration as there was a lot of fanfare around the size and scale of the deal with the company. And we had moved forward and things were in motion, even on behalf of the customer. And things were, and at the last second, someone stepped in at a higher level and swept our legs, and the deal went away. And so another learning there was that you've got to build more consensus than just one individual in any decision-making process. So that was a learning too, but nothing personal.
I'm not going to share them, but that triggers like 4 different stories. But amen. Know that. All right, I got 2 relatively quick questions for you guys. The questions will be short. The answers do not need to be. Bret, I'll start with you. Do you have any book that maybe has been gifted to you, you gifted to someone else, or you have read that has influenced maybe a certain part of your career or your career that you would recommend that really stands out?
Top of mind, one that I just read was The Unfinished Leader.
Okay.
I thought that was a great book, but I thought that was great. It just kind of talks about how leaders, like enterprise leadership, and how leaders interact with an organization and impact they have. So I thought it was pretty meaningful there. I've gleaned a lot off of some Harvard Business Review articles we've read about, and we're really into this part now about establishing culture within our sales organization. We've got a lot of young, new leaders. So how their actions impact their teams and how to build a team, and what is pace setting versus being a visionary leader versus empowering and coaching and those kind of things. So it's a mismatch of things. I mean, there's some other ones out there, but that's probably the one right now that's top of mind.
Well, I think you bring up a good point. Oftentimes we'll have folks like, I'm not really into reading, or where if you can get a Harvard Business Review article or something similar, it might be 3,000 or 4,000 words. Mm-hmm. It's still going to take some digestion. There's enough meat on that, but it's not 70,000 words. It's not a 250-page book. So I really like that. I think sometimes guys are like, I'm not a book reader. I don't really like to listen to Audible. So then it's like, well, if there's no books, there's nothing, when there's a whole range of things. I think that article is a great idea.
Yeah, it's awesome. There's a couple really good ones out there.
Yeah.
So when I was a young manager, a mentor of mine gave me First Break All the Rules, right? Which is an introduction to management to those who would be coming into a new position. And so that's been one I've handed out. And the theme and the philosophy behind it is everybody's different. People need to be managed differently, and you need to take an interest in their life, what's important to them. And so there's not one size fits all. And so that digs into that. And that's one that's always kind of stuck with me. And I've given that out to others, and it kind of has a special place in my heart.
Final question. I've heard this. There's a podcast I listen to. I really like it. It's called Invest Like the Best. Patrick O'Shaughnessy, the host, asks this at the end. And for a while I've listened, like, dude, I kind of hate this question. I would never ask this on my podcast. And the more I've listened to it, I heard a couple of answers come out. I've never asked this question. So both of you, I don't know if we have a trophy or anything for you, but I should be very proud. This is the original question that I've stolen from somebody else on their podcast. The question is, Chris, we're starting with you. What's the kindest thing someone has ever done for you?
It's a great question.
Thank you.
It felt important at the time, but it feels even more gracious now. So when I graduated from college, my parents were able to wipe out my student debt. And that, if I look back in time, that would have set me up to not have to worry about things that many have to, right? And let me take a path that wasn't exactly linear to get here, but allowed me to do the things that I want to do at a certain stage of my career from a work standpoint and try new things. And so I think I look back on that as the most generous, gracious gift I've been given.
That's a great answer. Yeah, Bret?
Mine's in line with family too. Back half of COVID, my father passed away. And it was a mess. You're trying to plan a funeral. We're in Nashville. We live in Virginia, and it's a long way away. And I remember coming out of everything, we get home, and my buddies from home had set up a dinner for my entire family. So that was hands down probably the best thing anybody's ever done for me.
Solid group of guys.
Yeah, it was awesome.
That's amazing. Well, cool. Gentlemen, I know you're busy. I appreciate you guys making time for this.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
I enjoyed this.
It was awesome.
Bret,
Good to be with you.
Chris, thank you.
Thank you.
All right then, friends, how did that go? Hopefully you enjoyed my conversation with Mr. Chris Gerhard and Bret Martz. If you got value from this episode with Chris and Bret, please share it with your network. People around you are looking to leaders like you to figure out where to invest their limited time and attention. And if you get a moment, please rate and review us on whatever podcast platform you are listening to or where you're watching this video. That always helps us grow our reach as we strive to bring our construction community together. All right, I'm done. That's all we got. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.